because it is a sensitive topic. But it is a topic that we need to address when it comes to the world that we live in. Because realistically, we live in a world that has some divisive things going on in the community, in our world, in our country. And we have to address, as a church, we have to deal with those things. We can't just shove them under the rug and act like they don't exist. Things that impact how we deal with one another, things that impact how we deal with those in the community, have to be addressed. In that discussion with the group that was there at that conference, there was a lot of different things that we talked about. Materialism, nationalism, are we Democrat, are we Republican, are we all of those things, a lot of different things that unfortunately in our country and in our world that we have to deal with and address. One of those things, when it comes to the churches of God, churches of Christ, one of the things that we have to address is race and culture. Race and culture and its relationship to the gospel. And realistically, if you can look at that picture, that's kind of how we view these topics. We view these topics as very divisive and so uncomfortable. Because we let our identity of who we are as a person dictate a lot of things that we do in our life. I am definitely guilty of doing that at times. The person that I am, the identity I take on, helps dictate sometimes the way my mind thinks and the politics and things that I value. The concept of identity politics in which groups of people have a particular race, religion, ethnic, social, or cultural identity, tends to promote their own specific interests or concerns without regard to others. That's the concept of identity politics. That's a concept that realistically does happen in our world today. We have seen it in the past, through elections, through movements, where people's thought processes have impacted the way they do things to the point that they care about this one thing and exclude everything else. Because those are the most interesting things that they care about at the moment. And case in point, the Black Lives Matter movement. I don't care your thoughts on it, good or bad. I don't care. That's not the point of what I'm bringing up. What I'm bringing up is that became a focal point, an identity for 51% of all Americans. 51% of all Americans in support, and that meant 49 against, right? That became an identity politic issue that we had to deal with in the country. You know what we could have done as a country? Brush it under the rug, act like it didn't exist. You know what something we could do as a church? Brush it under the rug, act like it doesn't exist. Identity politics don't exist. But that doesn't help the church. That doesn't help God's kingdom grow. That doesn't help God's church be the beacon of light that it's supposed to be in the community. All it does is hide an issue that can rear its ugly head in many other ways. Identity politics keeps American society healthy. Identity politics is all that's left. That's all we care about now. The left is using identity politics to implement their views. Identity politics, critical race theory, destroying our society. Deflecting whiteness. We have let, as a community, as a church, as a country, this divisive concept inundate us. And we are constantly put in front of those things, or those things are constantly put in front of us. How do we address that? As a church, how do we address that? Do we just step into it and just believe every word that's said? Do we step into it and start apologizing for all the things that we have done as a culture? Or claim that you guys have done this to me as a culture? Do we step into these identity politics? Or do we take a step back and say, you know what, first off, hold on, let's rethink this. I'm a Christian first. I'm a child of God first. To talk about race, culture, and the gospel, we've got to define some things. Because a lot of times we like to define words on how we define words on what we think rather than what a proper definition is. So let me give you some definitions out of Webster's. Race, any one group of people that humans often, I want to highlight humans often divided into based on physical traits regarded as common among people of shared ancestry. The second definition, a group of people sharing a common culture, geographical, logistical, or religious origin or background. That's the concept of race. So basically, what you look like, what you think. That's what race is. I'm just putting it in a little box for us. Culture, on the other hand, is the customary beliefs, our social forms, material traits of racial, religious, or social groups. The characteristic features of everyday existence. Our normal daily living, how we act, how we go through life, our culture, things that we're around. We're going to dive into both of these concepts first before we can talk about how the gospel is going to impact both of those things. We're going to start with race this morning. And when you talk about race, the first thing you got to ask, what is racism? What is it? Because that's what we're really talking about, right? When it comes to talking about race and the dividing lines that humans create in grouping people together, we're really talking about why do we not like each other based on the way we look. So let me ask you first, what is racism? Well, let me ask another question first. Do you believe racism exists? Get comfortable, guys. This is going to be uncomfortable. Do you believe racism exists? I do. I believe it exists. Racism, as a single item, a belief that race is a fundamental determinant of human traits and capabilities, and that a racial difference produces an inherent superiority over another race. Racism is the thought that a certain color of person, white, black, Asian, I don't care, is superior to somebody else. That is the concept. Let me ask you another step further. Do you believe that there's such thing as systematic racism? Not just a person being racist against somebody else, because I'm pretty sure everyone in this room can say, yes, that is true. But what about as a system? Policies and practices that exist in a whole society that result in and support a continuing unfair advantage. Do you believe that exists? How about institutional racism? Do you believe that exists? A racial attitude found in a ethnic group and in their traditions, in their beliefs, in their opinions. And they're so ingrained in these institutions or those thought processes that they have become practiced and sustained so long that they're common fact or common law and understood to be normal behavior. It's normal. Why am I asking these questions? First off, do you believe racism exists? I think the answer is very clearly yes, it exists. I hate the fact that it exists. I hate it. I think everyone in this room hates the fact that that concept exists at all. Is there systems in place? I don't know. I'm not going to answer that because I don't know. But I do know that as an institution, do we have tendencies that lean towards us being and appearing as if we don't care about another race. And that's uncomfortable to think about, isn't it? Because that means we got to look at how we believe certain things about other races, other types of people, and say, do I have practices and beliefs and thoughts and social norms and things like that I just have grown up thinking for so long that it's true? This is how the world defines these topics. I'm going to define it a little differently. It's a social construct based on the evolutionary idea, which scientists admit is a biological myth. Race in and of itself is an evolutionary concept. It's a myth. It is a concept that starts with us believing that somebody or some race or some group of people is less superior or is less than us, that we are far superior than somebody else. But in reality, the color of one's skin does not dictate anything related to intellect. It does not indicate at all your abilities when it comes to different things that you can do. In all observational honesty, we vary in degrees of brown. That's what it is in reality, based on the amount of melanin in our skin. Some of you guys have 0 melanin. I have a lot. But realistically, that's what we're talking about when it comes to race. It's all just a construct that we have created, a social construct that evolutionary beliefs have promoted. Does no good other than to divide us. What does God say about race? Is racism found in the Bible? Race in general, is it found in the Bible? No, it's not. God created man in his own image. In the image of God, he created them. Male and female, he created them. Stop. Genesis 9, verse 1, God blessed Noah and his sons and said to them, be fruitful and multiply and fill the earth. Guess what? Noah and his family was it. We are all from Noah and his family. We have degrees of melanin, but we all come from Noah and his family. And at the end of the day, we come from God, and we bear his image. Man and woman, white, black, Asian, Hispanic, every one of us bears the image of God. So why is there racism? If we all know that we are God's children, we're from God, the image of God, why is there racism in the world? Therefore, just as one man sinned, and sin entered into the world, and death through sin, and thus death spread upon all men because all sinned. Why is there racism in the world? Because we're humans who sin. The reality is we are the problem. The reality is we create social decisions when it comes to whether I like somebody based on the way they look. I don't like this person because he looks different. I don't like this person because his culture is different. I'm talking about race, sorry. This is why I don't like somebody. We create that, and because we're sinful, prideful, hateful people, we do that ourselves. God did not create us that way. The thief does not come except to steal and to kill and to destroy. You know, as Christians, it's easy to get caught up into this thought. And as you get caught up into this, Satan is sitting back eating popcorn and laughing. He's happy to see it. He's happy to see us destroy ourselves and to hate each other and say, you know what, you go ahead and go to the black church, you go to the Hispanic church, you go to the white church. We'll stay separated. You go hang out with the people that look like you. You go hang out with the people that look like you. And we don't come together and work together and understand that race is not what it's about. It's not about how we look. It's whether we are children of God. And all it does, the thief comes to destroy. That is his goal, and he will destroy the churches of God in these areas if we allow him to continue to let race and our thought processes on race get in the way of saving souls. I want to be real with you, though, for a minute. The concept of racism is not new to America. Not only is it not new to America, it's not new to the existence of man. The Israelites and Egyptians, we kind of forget that, don't we? The Egyptians hated the Israelites. I say we forget. I think it's pretty obvious, right? We talk about Moses. They had fear. The Egyptians had fear of the Israelites because there was no relationship. You realize prior to no relationship, where it says, there came a Pharaoh who knew not Joseph. Prior to that, guess what happened? Oh, the Israelites and Egyptians got along great. They worked together. They built all sorts of stuff. But fear with no relationship led to a hatred and desire to not like each other, to enslavement. How about David and the Philistines? That one throws people a lot. Did you know for a short period in time, David was going to be fighting for the Philistines? For a short period of time. The Philistines did not trust David because they had some assumptions. Well, he's an Israelite, so therefore he's going to defect and he's going to go back to the Israelites. Read the story, it's interesting. The generals and all these people thought one thing about this man. They made assumptions and lacked trust in him because of those assumptions. Mordecai and Haman and Esther, we know that story. It's pride and hatred on the side of Haman. The Jews and Samaritans, we talked about in the past the fact that Jews saw the Samaritans as dogs. And the Jews and the Samaritans hated the Jews. And then in the New Testament, you see the differences in cultures for the Jews and the Gentiles. And that caused a major problem in the church, the early church. Was racism there? Yeah. It's been throughout all history because we as humans fail at loving each other, truly valuing each other as God does. And it continues. It continues because we keep this concept and this thought process going throughout time. Racism among white Christians is higher than among non-religious. We say things like that. We see things like that on news. We have graphs and we have data that proves that religion or race and way you look is a leading component of hate crimes. White supremacists have ideas have historical roots in U.S. Christianity. We have these kind of concepts where people who are not white, who are not that race, that color, I'm just going to start saying color, guys, start feeling really, really scared. Let's be honest here. This drives fear. I like to act tough a lot. My wife likes to joke about that. It's very difficult for me to be vulnerable. But a lot of times, the lack of vulnerability and acting tough comes from a place of fear. For the first time in U.S. history, white Americans are faced with the prospect of being a minority in their own country. Ooh. While many of our multicultural cities may well celebrate the browning of America, As a welcome step away from white supremacy, it is safe to say a large number of American whites are more anxious about this phenomenon. So not only now do we have one side of the aisle where we have people who are of color who are starting to fear or who have been in fear of people looking and thinking that they are less than the other people, that people are more superior to them. Now you have the other side of the aisle where people are being treated wrongly because they're white, because they're not people of color. Therefore, they're automatically bad. Whites have replaced the blacks as the primary victim of discrimination. We're hearing and reading articles on both sides of these aisles, and these issues are being put forward before us, and we're causing fear here on this side of people of color. We're causing fear on the side of the people who are not of color. We're causing fear on both sides, and what does that do? What does that kind of fear do? Fear of our race, fear of what we look like, and wanting to being scared of how we're going to be treated and discriminated. Guess what we do? We like to congregate with our own people. I'm going to stay where it's safe. I'm going to stay where I know I'm not going to be looked down on by how I look. I'm going to stay with people who can talk the way I talk, who think the way I think, who feel the way I feel. We retreat into tribalism. This is my tribe. And I want you to think about this a little bit further. We retreat into tribalism. You do your black church over there. We're going to do our white church over here. You do your Hispanic church over here. Because we want to keep our thought process together. We want to isolate. And it doesn't just happen with white and black. It happens with Latino, Asians, men and women, Christians, Jews, Muslims, straight people, gay people, liberals, conservatives. All of this, whenever you feel attacked, they all congregate and isolate. Let me ask you, do you find yourself doing that? When you're put in a situation where you're attacked for how you look, what you do, how you think, whatever, let me get with the people that think the way I think, that feel the way I feel. Do we get more defensive? We create this idea of us versus them. This is one of the graphs that I was able to find. About 2/3 of black Southerners who attend a religious services go to a black church, black congregation, sorry. 2/3. What are we doing as a church to create that? I'm not looking at the people that are attending black churches and saying, well, why don't you go to a white church? I'm not saying that. I'm asking us as a Christian community, what are we doing to make people feel isolated like that? That I have to go to a black church. I'm not saying we're doing anything. I am asking the question, look inside yourself, I'm looking inside myself, what am I doing to create that kind of feeling? Are we? It's a question to ask. We read this verse earlier. A thief does not come except to steal, to kill, and destroy. We know that. That's what Satan's goal is. God's response to that is put on the whole armor of God. Put on the whole armor of God, because we don't wrestle against flesh and blood. You know what it says? Guess what you don't wrestle against? I don't wrestle against my brother. I don't wrestle against Ty. I don't wrestle against Jerry. I don't wrestle against Timothy. I don't wrestle against flesh and blood. I am wrestling against Satan. And if I am going to do my job as a Christian and not let race or the concept of color determine whether I'm going to isolate myself with my people that look like me, that I'm going to put on the whole armor of God and do my job. And that is not to wrestle against my brothers and sisters. It permeates, unfortunately, our churches at times. So much so that even James talks about this concept. One that wears fine clothes, a poor man, have you not become judges with evil thoughts? When you start looking at the way a person looks and saying, hey, you need to, or man, I'm going to not talk to this person because he makes me feel uncomfortable because he looks different than me. You have become judges with evil thoughts based on appearance. You do not have a right to do that. As God's children, you do not have a right to look at the way somebody looks and say, you are not a good Christian, and don't like the way you look. You have become judges with evil thoughts. The second concept that we were talking about was culture. I found this very interesting. Every single one of us, I don't care who you are, has a culture wheel. Culture wheel is all of the components in your life as a person that impact and determine who you are, that help form your thoughts, your beliefs, the way you carry yourself. The greater community, the community of people that you're around, helps impact your culture, your knowledge and the studies, the level of knowledge and studies. The language you speak impacts. The things you hold as traditions and rituals, the skills that you've learned, tools, arts, food, all of these things create a culture. My culture is definitely different than other people. Your culture is definitely different than other people. Within even a family, you can have very differing culture wheels. Experience the same thing, but the way it has impacted them is totally different. Let me give you an example. Person one has a culture wheel. They have thoughts and things that they have experienced in their life. They have been around a community of a certain ethnic group, and that's what they believe. That's how they have lived their life. And they've got person number two who's got a same culture wheel of a different type. Culture wheel number one was taught to not like culture wheel number two. And culture wheel number two, person number two, was taught that these people don't like you. And within that culture wheel, that greater community has created this idea in their minds that, you know what, I don't like this person, they don't like me, we're going to just stay away, and we're going to stay over here. If they really wanted to be God's people, then they would just come over and be a part of our culture wheel. Let me ask you a question. Who are you to judge another servant? To his own master he stands or falls. Indeed, he was made to stand, for God is able to make him stand. One person esteems a day above another esteems every day alike. Let each be fully convinced in his mind. Who are you to judge another person's culture wheel? I know I'm making it sound really weird, saying the words culture wheel. Who are you to judge the way a person views the world? I'm not saying God, I'm not saying Christ, I'm not saying the gospel, I'm not even saying anything related to that. I am saying how they view the world. What right do we as people have to question that? They are answerable to God, not you. Just the same as you are not answerable to them, you are answerable to God. The people I was talking about were Jews and Gentiles. I wasn't talking white, black. I wasn't talking Asians. I wasn't talking Hispanics. I was talking about the Jews and Gentiles. That was a first century problem that was going on. The Jews had a culture wheel that dated back for years and centuries of being God's chosen people, of being this way. This is how I'm supposed to be. And Gentiles are coming in as the heathens, becoming Christians who have a completely different culture wheel. Their lives and their traditions and their thoughts are completely different than the rigid, strict nature of Jews. How do you integrate those two together? That was a huge problem. Because guess what? The Jews wanted to bring the Gentiles under bondage. And bring them into that culture and say, you know what? Your culture doesn't work. Your culture, I don't like it. It makes me uncomfortable. So let me bring you into the culture that's good, which is my culture. At the same time, Paul's telling those Gentiles, let me go back, telling those Gentiles, don't give in. Because they're spying out your liberty, trying to bring you under bondage. But at the same time, he's also saying, you know what, I'm a Jew. I'm still a Jew. There are cultural things about being a Jew that I am still going to do because I am Jewish. That didn't make the Jewish culture wheel wrong. You know, we view a lot of the times the concept of the Jews bringing in a lot of these doctrines into Christianity as wrong. And as far as doctrine was concerned, that was wrong, absolutely. But if as a culture, if you did it as a culture because this is my culture, Paul had no issue with that. He had no issue with that. But if you're a Gentile being forced to live the life of a Jew, he's like, hold on, what are you doing here? That's not okay. You guys have seen this before. I spoke on Romans. These are some of the ideas that they struggled with. And it was a divide in the Roman church because of those things. And Paul says, to a Jew, I became a Jew. And to those that are without the law, Mosaical law, I became as one without the Mosaical law. And to the weak, I became weak, that I might win the weak. I became all things to all men, that I may by all means save some. Let's bring it home again. Black Christian, white Christian, Hispanic Christian. Everybody has a different culture wheel. Everybody has different things in their lives that have impacted and shaped their coming to Christ. Not only their coming to Christ, but also their lifestyle. Are you forcing your culture on someone else? Are you unwilling to notice the fact that there are differences in people? What can we do? Make disciples of all nations is what God told us to do. That's the command. Not all European countries, not all African countries only, not all Asian countries only, not all Hispanic countries, sorry. He said all nations. So, how does the gospel versus race? The gospel teaches us to identify, not to identify by ethnicity, but identify by the word Christian. Opposing racism across racial groups is important. Do you understand that? From a religious global view, opposing racism is more important than belief in God, belief in regularly attending worship services. That kind of is mind-blowing to me a little bit, that it's more important to people. We focus on race way too much. That's what I want to get out of this graph. It is more important for us to fight against racism than it is to believe in God. or to go to services. What is wrong with us? This is my family. Those of you who didn't know me, shock, right? I have white parents. I was adopted when I was 4 years old. Sorry, I realized that when looking at that those who didn't know me, that might have thrown some people. I was adopted when I was 4 years old. If my parents had bought into the concept that race was more important than what God wanted for them, I wouldn't be here. I would be living on the streets of India, still, or dead, not sure. And because they chose to value the gospel and what God wanted, which was to love those that didn't have fathers, this is what I get. This is my family. I have a beautiful wife that is my pillar. I have 3 kids. I have a strong 13-year-old with a gentle strength that I envy. I have a 5-year-old son, Asher, who's down there holding a rock because it's really cool, who enjoys life, loves life. I have a daughter at the leadership conference. I said nobody's good enough for her, but I've readjusted that I hope finds a man that loves God more than anything else. Don't identify by ethnicity. It doesn't matter. I've got a funny story to throw in here. And those of you who know, you know. There was a member of this congregation. I will narrow it down. There was a member of this congregation when my 5-year-old was a little younger. They were looking at her, and you saw the picture of my parents. My dad has a cousin who had two children. One of those was about 4 or 5 years old when this person knew them, and this is what they were remembering in their mind. And they said, "Man, Asher has this. He looks like the teal side." Well, that's my dad's side of the family. He said, "Man, he's got these features, and he looks like your cousin Carson." And I sat there for a minute and said, "Okay." And I gave them a few minutes, and I'm like, "Okay," but and she's like, "No, really, he looks like Carson on the teal side, your dad's side." I'm not technically part of that family. I'm adopted, remember? Oh, yeah, I forgot. She didn't see what color I was. She didn't see what color my kids were. What she saw was my dad and my family as one unit. Race meant nothing. Unity starts with self-sacrifice. Present your body as a living sacrifice. Don't think of yourself more highly, but think soberly. You know, the reality is, on both sides of this issue, when it comes to race and culture, we value ourselves a lot whenever we start putting that above everything else. We start caring about that more than we care about worshiping God and being committed to God. We are not being a living sacrifice. When we care about what people look like more then serving God, we are not being a living sacrifice. We are not thinking soberly. It's not about you. It's about Christ. You know, it wasn't about being a Jew or Gentile, and that's basically what Paul told the Romans. He said, you're a new creation, and he also told the Galatians, you're a new creation. You are not Jew. You are not Gentile. So how can we approach those differences? How can we as a church be a light to heal racial divisions? Careful communications. You know, a lot of times you'll find when people get offended by somebody or whatever, it's an offhanded comment, and it's because we're careless with what we say. You don't know how your words may impact somebody's viewpoint of themselves because you have a different culture wheel, racial background, whatever, than that other person. Are you careful with how you talk to people? Or are we careless? Words of the reckless pierce like swords. Listen to learn. He who answers a matter before he hears is folly and shame to him. We do that a lot, don't we? We like to talk and we just don't want to listen to what somebody else says. I'm right, you're wrong. That's the end of it. HR your words. People don't like that word HR. I don't like that word HR because it means now I got to pay attention to what I do and how I do, right? According to the need of the moment, so that it will give grace to the hearer. Be careful on how and what you do so that it provides edification, builds up each other. I'm going to give you another story here. Another person in this room was having a discussion with somebody. This person was discussing the concept of a word and how it was pronounced. One person said pecan, the other person said pecan. It was literally that silly, right? That's the concept. Well, if you know, sometimes in this culture we've got a word. The word pecan comes from kind of northern Oklahoma. I'm northern Texas, East Texas. That's kind of the word they use for pecan pie or pecan pie. But if you're from other places, they use the word pecan. Well, this person in the argument was saying, oh, it's pecan, that's the word. And this person, no, it's pecan. And they say, well, it's because you're from the South. That person's intention by that word was you're from the southern part of Texas, right? The person that was saying pecan was Hispanic. What do you think they heard? What do you think they heard? They heard you're from Mexico. Be careful, because those are words that you may not think matter. But HR your words. Be careful, because it does matter to them. Now, thankfully, that person knew the heart of the person who said you're from the South and knew that is definitely not what they meant. But that person could have easily got offended and left the church and said, you know what, this person doesn't like Hispanic people. Honor the differences. Honor the differences. You know, sometimes we struggle with honoring the fact that we are different. God's people are from all nations. It's easy when the work is in Nigeria to say, yeah, they're different. And they do things differently there. We honor them for worshiping God there. It's great. It's easy to do that in India and say, you know, the women and men sit separately, and that's okay for that culture. That's okay there. But whenever the culture is different cultures within the same country, we struggle to say it's okay and to honor that difference. You need to fit my mold. The only way you're going to learn to honor your differences is by spending time together. Spending time together. There have been people in this room that I was terrified of. You know. If you know, you know. Until I spent time with them and got to learn them as a person, understand their culture will, understand who they were as a person. Because we're all sons of God. We are all one in Christ. Out of every tribe, every tongue, and people and nation, God has redeemed us. How about integrating things into our culture as a church? We talked about this a minute ago, right? The divisiveness of this. It's that simple. We'll do it again. You might have missed it. That's it. Focus on being a Christian. Focus on doing godly things. Focus on the gospel, not about all these issues that you hold tight to, we have to do. Because here's the uncomfortable truth. There's no culturally right or wrong way to express Christianity. I'm not saying doctrine. Don't hear me in that and twist that concept. I am saying culturally. There is no cultural right or wrong way to express that. Because when you value your culture and how you do things as a church, how you do things as a group of people, and you make that more important. You have made it a common law that your practices, your preferences are more important. You're doing what Paul is warning against. As many have desired to make a good showing in the flesh. For not even those who are circumcised keep the law, but they desire to have you circumcised, that they may boast in your flesh. They are trying to, people, when we try to convert someone over to our culture, I'm not saying our doctrine of God. I'm saying our culture, when saying your culture is wrong, we're going to have you do what we do and walk the line we walk, look the way we look. What gain do you get from it? Other than boasting in the flesh. What purpose? You fit my culture now. Thank you. You want to know why we have divided churches? Because we want everybody to fit within that culture. Want to know why we have a black church, an Hispanic church, and a white church? Because we don't want to allow a coming together of the different types of cultures. We want people to fit within our lines. We're doing what the Pharisees did. Why are you, your disciples, transgressing the traditions of the elders? And God's commandment of teach all nations is being superseded because we want to keep our tradition. Uncomfortable does not mean unscriptural. I want to say that again. Just because you're uncomfortable with someone standing for a song, sorry you're uncomfortable. Doesn't make it wrong for them to do that. I'm sorry if you find it uncomfortable that someone decides to stand up for all 3 songs. I'm sorry. Doesn't make it wrong. We have preferences and culture and things that we like that we make into common law when there's no need to be. And it becomes a divisive issue. And when you divide and you become divisive like that, you create this feeling of I have to congregate with the people that think the way I think. For the kingdom of God is not eating and drinking, but is righteousness and peace and joy in the Holy Spirit. For he who serves Christ in these things is acceptable to God. Do we keep this in the forefront of our mind? I beseech you to walk worthy of the calling, endeavoring to keep the unity of the Spirit in the bonds of peace. There is one body. So what can we do as a church and as individuals? Communicate carefully. Think about it yourself. Communicate carefully. Listen to learn about this person. Learn about their culture. Learn about who they are. Be careful on how you say things. Just be aware. I'm not saying you have to walk on eggshells, but at least be aware. If I say the word South to someone that's Hispanic, it might mean something a little different. Just be aware. I'm not saying you can't say the word South. Just be aware. Honor the differences. Step out of the comfort zones. Build relationships and trust. And give grace. Give grace. As a church, be intentional and proactive in reaching out to those, not because you're scared of this certain kind of person or their culture and don't want that to infiltrate our church. We're putting that above Christ when we do that. Be proactive, be inviting, be inclusive in how we deal with people. Don't love the sin. I'm not saying if there's someone who is coming in with sinful thoughts and wants to do, again, I'm talking about in the framework of Christ. HR your words, embrace the differences. It's exactly the same as for the individual. At the end of the day, the hour is coming, and now is when true worshipers will worship the Father in spirit and in truth, for the Father seeks such to worship him. God seeks those to worship him. He doesn't say who are white, who are Hispanic, who are black, who are Indian. He says, for the Father seeks such to worship him. Are we a type of people that strive to focus on the gospel and not care about race, not care about culture, not care about those things that can divide us, but instead to focus on what God has called us to focus on? That is the gospel. That is preaching and teaching all nations so we can wear the name of Christ and show the world what true unity, true love, true passion for the world, true passion for God looks like.
Thanks for joining our Sermon Series podcast today. For more, check us out on YouTube or come worship with us on Sunday mornings and Wednesday evenings.